Good morning. Thank you very much for coming. This is our press briefing regarding the seminar that we conducted yesterday about strengthening public-private partnership to reduce food losses in the supply chain of fishery and livestock. I'm Dr. Rod Estigoy of the Philippine Center for Postharvest Development and Mechanization. So, before we start, I would like to ask some opening statements from our guests this morning. Our guests are Director Rex L. Bingabing from the Philippine Center for Post-Harvest Development and Mechanization, or PhilMech, and Dr. Dong Chong Hu, Deputy Director General of the Department of International Affairs, Council of Agriculture, Chinese Taipei. So may we hear some opening statements from them. Director Bingabing first.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So yesterday we had this seminar, which was organized by Chinese Taipei, and we in the Philippines, the PhilMech, co-organized the hosting of this event. So it is, as mentioned earlier, it's a seminar on strengthening public-private partnership to reduce food loss in the supply chain of livestock and fisheries. And this is actually part of a multi-year project by Chinese Taipei. So of course the objective is to reduce food losses because as indicated in several studies, it is seen that 1/3 of the total food production is wasted, So it's a significant amount considering that a lot of people are going hungry all over the world. So if we can reduce this 1/3, then it would have a significant impact. So the idea for the seminar is to have an exchange of ideas on strategies on how to reduce post-harvest and food loss and food waste. And we invited different participants from member economies, both coming from the government and the private sector, to share their best practices on how to reduce losses on livestock and fisheries. Okay, so maybe Dr. Chang, who is the part of the Chinese Taipei delegation, is the lead of the project, can add some more to that regarding the event.
Thank you, Rex, and good morning. It's a great pleasure for me to be here on behalf of the delegation of Chinese Taipei. Our lead delegates has to leave early for another important assignment, but she wants me to represent her here to express our sincere appreciation for the hospitality and also for the wonderful hosting of this seminar. This seminar is a multi-year Apec project initiated by Chinese Taipei, and this year we address the issue in fishery and livestock, and we are very happy that we have the strong support from the government of the Philippines on this particular issue, and also the very strong support from PhilMech and under the leadership of Engineer Rex Bingabing. And so this seminar, we are very happy to be the kickoff event of the Food Security Week in Apec that's take place in this Iloilo, this wonderful, beautiful city of love. And we have 80 participants yesterday. which is a very prominent event, and from 15 member economies attended this seminar. So as Rex already mentioned, the theme of this event is how we can build a public-private partnership to address this issue. So why we want to mention this as a theme, and because the prevalence of the small-scale producers and fishers in this region makes the tracking of the post-harvest food losses a very, very difficult task. And then which translate into the many difficulties in terms of the supply chain management and also related policy and the strategy to address this problem. And the other reason is that we have a constant threat from the natural disaster, typhoons, earthquakes, and also the climate change. So I think these kind of issues have many policy implications that cannot be addressed solely by the private sector nor by only the government. So we need to work as a partners and also among the community, the Apec as a community. And so we think that this seminar will help all the member economy and all the producers to benefit from some of the strategies and also the practices that we are proposing, and also to share the very useful information and also experience here in the seminar. And the other issue that is about the experience sharing, that we are very lucky to invite a keynote speaker that tell us that in order to reduce losses, it's not only research or science should be enhanced, but also the economic incentive, and also how we can help the producers to make more profit and also create job opportunities. It's also important that so that the economic incentive is also needs to be addressed. Yeah, so I think we have a quite successful discussion, and also during the afternoon we have a breakout discussion, and all the participants are heavily involved in the networking and discussion, and create many good policy recommendations. So we're happy to share with you during this press conference. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I committed a blunder. She is Dr. Emily Chang, fellow of the research fellow from, sorry.
National University.
Can we have now the questions, or if you have clarifications? But before we do that, please state your name and the media outfit that you represent. Thank you. Would like to shoot the first question? Yes, sir?
Good morning. Angelo Samonte from Presidential News Desk. My question is, do you have a figure of annual losses in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of in livestock and fisheries?
Excuse me, can you repeat again? I didn't.
The figure on
Figure?
of losses for
okay.
Estimate
livestock
of
and
losses.
fisheries for-
Yeah, we have
The amount, ma'am, the amount.
Okay,
Annual.
so we have a percentage in terms of the total production. A very rough estimate. It's based on very preliminary assessment. Like the livestock losses and waste is about 20 to 30%, and on the fishery, it's a little higher, about 30 to 40% in this APEC region. Yes, the dairy sector, I think, has a lower percentage, maybe 10 to 15%. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
If I may just add, there's a well the difference between the livestock, the fisheries, and the other commodities of the agriculture sector is the for the other commodities like grains, fruits, and vegetables, we have a clear figures on losses because we have a lot of studies already on losses along the different value chain. I mean, along the value chain, so we can identify where the losses are coming from for other commodities. The problem with the fisheries and livestock is we have a rough figure, but there has not been a too much study really on the losses, which was actually emphasized during the workshop yesterday. So we were dealing with these figures, but these are just rough estimates, and we don't know exactly where along the value chain these losses are coming from. So we have to identify first where these losses really are coming from. Is it from during the harvest, during the processing, the transportation? We have to identify what particular losses comes from this activity, so we can clearly address the issue. So that's the problem with the livestock and fisheries. There's not too much study yet which were done to identify these losses.
Thank you, Director Bingabing. Are there some more clarifications regarding the opening statements?
Sir, why is the concentration is on livestock and fisheries? There's no grain or
no, for this year, it was livestock and fisheries, but last year it was for fruits and vegetables, right?
Yes,
Fruits and
yes.
vegetables. So it's as I mentioned earlier, this is a multi-year project. 5 years? Is
Yeah,
that
5-year
5-year
project.
project.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
it would cover other commodities, but for this year, the concentration was on livestock and fisheries.
Yes, this is a 5-year project. The first year we focus on the grain and cereal crop, and the second year vegetable and fruit, and this year on fishery and the livestock. Yes.
Thank you. Are there some more clarifications? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm Chris Mundo from Philippines News Agency to Director Bingabing. Sir, of the total one-third of the total production being wasted, in what stage we have the bulk of those losses? And to Ms. Chang, what are those specific targets of the MYP, and how much do you want to bring down the figures from one-third of the total production being wasted? What's your target figure, and what are those strategies to achieve those targets, and the timeline of this project? Thank you.
Okay, to answer your first question, the losses that we're talking about, it varies depending on the type of economies. So like, for example, for developed economies, the losses comes from mostly on what they term as food waste. So there are two types of loss. Food loss, which covers from production to post-harvest. Then we have food waste, which is basically those food that are wasted, the leftovers, the spoilage, those. So for developed economies, it's more on food wastage. So because they have the more money to buy food, we can say that they're buying more than they can consume. So most of these are wasted or get spoiled. But for developing countries, like for the case of the Philippines, the losses comes more on the post-harvest side. So for our food waste, it's just about 5 to 10% for developing countries, but we have higher food losses. For developed countries, it's the reverse. They have more than 20 to 30% food waste. Then very very little on post-harvest loss because they have good technologies, more efficient technologies to address the post-harvest losses. So that's the difference. It depends on the economy, actually.
For the target issue, yeah, as Rex has mentioned, this loss assessment is very difficult, and also it involves multi-dimensional aspect from production, food safety, to many regulatory issues. So it is very hard, difficult to identify a specific target for the APEC as a whole. And also there's you have to recognize the diversity in this area, that you have very traditional sector, but you have also very modern type of supply chain. So it's very highly unlikely we can come up with a uniform assessment and then or a uniform target for all economies. We need to recognize the individual characteristic in each individual economy. So we try to create the general principle in terms of we have a goal to achieve, but in terms of specific target, we want to let each individual economy to decide their target, and also how and in what extent they can try their best. And also we like to propose that we can provide some benchmarking or best practice to share the experience, so that you can make the progress for this region to benefit from the producer to all the consumers. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. Other clarification or questions? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Lilibeth French from PIA. To Director Bingabing, sir, in the country, what are the initiative or measures that the government have already implemented to mitigate or reduce the food losses in our supply chain?
Okay, for the other commodities like grains, fruits, and vegetables, the Department of Agriculture over the past years have initiated programs to address the issue on post-harvest loss. So one we had the mechanization program for the different commodity. We had for rice, corn, and high-value crops. So under the program, we are giving farm machineries, production machineries, and processing equipment and facilities to farmers cooperative. So the idea is to make them accessible to these new technologies, so that they would have better productivity and reduce the losses because they're using more efficient machines in processing. So that's for the grains and the fruits and vegetables. For the livestock, though, well, I'm not from fisheries and livestock, but from the discussions yesterday, it seems that the focus of the government was more on the production, increasing the production, but not so much. We're not looking yet really on the losses along the value chain of fisheries and livestock. So the government had been trying to increase the amount of production. So that's the logic behind the fisheries, the fisheries closure of the new law on the fisheries, where they have a 3-month ban, I think, on fishing. So that the idea is to increase the harvest of fishes, and these are the programs that were initiated for the livestock and fisheries. It's more on increasing production, but not yet on looking at really the different activities along the value chain. So I guess the workshop yesterday is an eye opener for because we had the representatives from the livestock and fisheries sector, and I think it's an eye opener for them that we should start looking at the complete value chain and identify the losses that is incurred in these activities.
Thank you, Director Bingabing. Yes, I saw two hands. You first, then, yeah. Thank you.
Sa kay Director Bingabing. Sir, how much how much reduction do we expect because we're pushing for mechanization? When we go full-blown with the mechanization, how much percentage mga losses that we would be expecting or we are targeting?
Okay, we had a study on for rice because that's the initial commodity that we did. For rice, the current loss figure for rice is about 16.4%, right? 16.4%. Now, we had a study in Nueva Ecija where most of the farmers are using modern machineries and milling equipment, and we found out that the loss can go down to about 10 to 11% by simply using the combine harvester and inefficient milling. Very significant is the combine harvester because for the combine harvester, the loss is just about 2 to 3% for rice, where compared to if you will be using the traditional method of reaping and threshing, it goes to about more than 5%. So that's a significant figure. So that's for rice. So that's a difference of about 5%, right? 5% gain. For corn, we're looking at about from the current 7%, we're looking to lower it down to about 5%. So that's the.
By the way, I'm Joel Franco of RMN Iloilo. Sir, in the Philippines, we have more workers than landlords or than big capitalists in the field of agriculture. How do we balance the loss of job as against our push, our drive for farm mechanization? Thank you.
Okay. In the mechanization program, what we did was to instead of giving these machineries to individual farmers, we encourage what we call farm service providers. So these are the farm laborers. So we encourage them to group themselves into cooperatives or association. Then we will provide them with machineries like transplanter, mechanical harvester. So in effect, they can be termed as professional farmers. So they won't really be displaced, but we would be able to increase their productivity because we organize them as a group that would serve, like for example, land preparation, planting, or harvesting. And they have access to modern equipment. So that's the concept that we're introducing. So there would be minimal displacement of labor because they would still be farm workers, farm service providers, but they are more productive because they're managing a pool of machineries.
So instead of providing the manual labor, they provide services. Still, but through machineries. Yeah. Yes, sir? Okay.
Good morning. I'm Ray Martes Capel of Panay News. Sir, with the extent of El Nino, sir, do you have a projection on how much will be the losses on the industry?
I don't have readily the figure and the estimate on how much we would lose because of the El Nino, but the government, together with the PhilMec and the other agencies like BSWM, National Irrigation Authority, they're doing already initiatives on countering the effects of El Nino. So number one, the Department of Agriculture is giving drought-resilient seeds for rice. So that would minimize the losses that we would incur for rice production. Then the BSWM is starting to distribute water pumps, so to help the farmers for irrigation. So we're trying to. I'm sorry, I don't have the estimate, but the Department of Agriculture is trying to address the issue for El Nino. For for fisheries, well, as mentioned, we have a very rough data. It's about 30 to 40% loss for fisheries. For the livestock, for Philippines.
mentioned.
But
Philippines?
he's asking about the Philippines. As I mentioned, actually we were asking the representatives from
Bureau-
BAI and
Bureau of Animal
PCC yesterday, and it seems that even them, they don't have exact figures on the losses. As I've mentioned, they've been concentrating on how to improve productivity, so producing more. However, they haven't really looked into the losses along the value chain. As I've mentioned, it seemed to be an eye-opener for them yesterday that they really must take a look on the losses, because right now we're just concentrating on producing more, how to produce more, but for the losses, they just count the mortality, so those are the losses, the loss figures that they have, but for the other activities along the value chain, they don't have yet.
Thank you, Director Bingabing. Are there some more?
Sir, usually the initiative in addressing these problems, usually government, what will be the role of the private sector in reducing the losses?
Yes, during our discussion that we mentioned there are two aspects can be done by the private sector. One is for the loss assessment, because we know the challenge we have for this region to do this kind of assessment. And part of the reason is for the data confidentiality, because the supply chain in this region is rapidly changing and transforming, so it's very difficult to track, keep a good tracking records, and also without building the trust between the government and the private sector, it's very hard for the private sector to release the information. So this is one aspect that private sector can provide useful information for government to make the right decision. The other is on the loss reduction. I think the private sector needs support from the government in terms of the infrastructure and also some investment in the R&D, because many of the post-harvest practices, especially the cold chain, consume a lot of energy. If you don't have a good infrastructure and also good energy support system, it's very difficult for the private sector to play a role. So these are the two aspects that we think the private sector can work with the government together and also provide the good business model, so that all the players along the supply chain can survive and make a win-win situation. Yes, that's the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. Yes, ma'am?
Good morning. My name is Sweden Velado from People's Television. For Director Bingabing, sir, since the establishment of APEC Policy Partnership Food Security in 2011, what strategies have we developed to reduce food loss and waste that we are now applying here in the Philippines?
Yeah, since Rod is had been here longer than me, so he was mentioning some projects which I'm also familiar with, but I think he can better answer the question.
Okay, for high-value crops and some fishery products, the Department of Agriculture initiated a program called National Cold Chain Program, where the government placed cold storage facilities, bagsakan centers, and trading posts in relation to high-value crops and fisheries. So, in the past, these were given to local government units and cooperatives or organizations who will manage the facilities. For example, in Benguet, where semi-temperate vegetables are being raised, if farmers would like to reach a niche market, the high-end market like supermarkets or malls or restaurants or hotels, they can use cold storage, the cold chain facilities from the farm to the high-end market using an interrupted refrigeration system. And this is working for Benguet because this is the prime areas where semi-temperate vegetables are grown. There's also similar setup in Cagayan. Farmers producing semi-temperate vegetables in the Bukidnon area were also given facilities so that they can transport their produce, fresh produce from Normin Veggies, they call it, the big organization of vegetable farmers there, that they can bring their produce to Metro Manila. And side by side with the program, from the farm to the nearest road, the government also placed agricultural tramline system that would transport the farm produce from remote areas to the nearest road. And this drastically reduces the losses being incurred at the time that farmers harvest their produce and they cannot transport their produce right away because of ravines or rivers or cliffs that hindered them from bringing their produce to the nearest road. So the agricultural tramline system is just is like a zip line or a cable car that brings the produce from the production area to the nearest road, and at the same time, whole inputs coming from the road to their farms. And also, the some initiative of the Department of Agriculture in terms of providing infrastructure and facilities also for organic farming. Recently, the PhilMec, or our agency, is the one mandated to provide all these facilities so that farmers or farmer groups are given capability to handle the produce, and they can manage selling this to higher end or high end markets. So these are the initiatives of the government in the past until now. Yes, we're very sorry, but Dr. Chang has another appointment, and even Director Bingabing, so maybe entertain just 2 more questions if that's okay with you. Thank you. The lady and the gentleman at the back.
Just want to get some data lang. How much is, can you please reiterate the importance of the livestock and fisheries industries, and how much is the share of these industries in the APEC economy in terms of revenue and employment?
Yes, the livestock and the fishery industry, in terms of total production, I think it's more than, for the livestock, it's more than 70%, and the fisheries even higher, more than 80 to 85% of the global production. In terms of trade, it's about 50 to 60%. So it's a very huge share in terms of the global production and also trade. And so it is very important that under the limitation of water and land that's available in this region, that we need to emphasize the importance of reducing food losses and waste, so that we can provide the food and ensure our food security very cost efficient, effectively and efficiently. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. Yes.
Good morning, Nel from Pinas Events. Based on the figures that you gave earlier, the 20 to 30% losses on livestock and 30 to 40% on fisheries, were you able to determine how much of those losses accounts for the natural disaster?
Well, this is a very challenging issue. That's why we have this kind of multi-year project, so that we can come up with the assessment methodology. But when we try to address this methodological issue, we found there very, very limited research has been done in this area, and so especially fishery and livestock. So I think we're still working on that, and we hope that we can address some of this kind of uncertainty issue from the natural disaster. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. Thank you very much for coming, and good morning.